We're going to get into it. But before we get started, we're going to do a little community exercise in the spirit of bringing people together in the workplace. So if everybody could turn to somebody that they don't know, I know it's scary, but we're all here to network and meet each other. Turn to somebody that you don't know and share one thing that you're grateful for. Okay, ready? And your name, and share names. And bonus points if you remember the name.
Literally saying.
There we go, bring it up.
I was going to say, Kathleen.
Does anyone not have a person? No, these are good.
What are you grateful for?
Healthy family.
Nice, very good.
How about you?
Today I'm super grateful for the I have a 1-year-old and she's got amazing teachers and I just am so grateful that
I know, it's
she has fun
buzzing.
at school. So.
He's sending pictures. Is that?
Oh yeah, I mean they just they're so great. They're incredible.
It's not
Yeah.
like we were going.
No, they're just
So
so
when I do
tuned
sponsors,
in.
just switch to
What about you,
sponsors,
Sabrina?
yeah.
Mine's 9.
Yeah,
Sorry,
what are you
you're
grateful
asking
for?
grateful.
Yeah.
What are you grateful for?
Not grateful for the 9-year-old.
Actually, it could have been done better.
Alrighty.
All right. Wrapping up our little gratitudes, everyone.
Yeah.
Coming back into our space here. Giving it a minute. I like that, though. That seemed to work. That was good. That was good. That popped off, right? Everybody was into the gratitudes? No, it doesn't amplify anything. All right. Welcome back, everyone.
It's just for that. I'm sorry.
Coming back into our space. That was good. Okay. Sharing gratitudes, right? That's part of building this human-to-human work culture that we're all super, super excited about. So again, welcome to the 11th annual Denver Startup Week. This is very, very exciting. Before we get started, I'd like to give a little shout out to our title sponsors who are making this all happen. That would be Amazon, Capital One Cafe, Dell for Startups, Downtown Denver Partnership. All of them are really coming together to bring this ecosystem in Denver into a bigger place and allow all of us to access it. So it's very, very exciting. A couple housekeeping notes before we get started. By attending this panel, you are agreeing to be on video and potentially pictures for promotional material. And if you would like to share any part of your Denver startup journey, we ask that you use the hashtag DSW Startup Week. So with that being said, we're going to get into this. Okay, we're going to try and speak up. The microphone is actually going into the camera, so it's for the camera audio. We will try and speak up, though. Thank you for that. That's totally a good call. Yeah, and if you want to move closer, we've got seats in the front. That's totally an option. Okay, amazing. So my name is Justin. I live in Boulder, which is not too far away. I initially came out here for school and just ended up loving the lifestyle like we all do so much out here. My background is in film, media, communications, but recently I started a company that's focused on helping entry-level talent integrate more effectively into the workplace. That's definitely some of the topics that we're going to be talking about and diving into. But before we continue on with that, I would love to take a moment to introduce our amazing panelists. So if you could start with your name, what you do for your job, and then also why you're passionate about this topic.
Yeah, so I'm Kathleen Casanova. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called Project Potluck, and we support people of color in the consumer product industry. So we provide mentorship, community, connection, resources, and programming. A lot of the people we work with are entrepreneurs and founders, and we also have a lot of career professionals who are in mostly the natural and organics food and beverage space. So we're a newer nonprofit, and we're so excited to be really supporting an industry that needs more diversity, and we want to make sure that our consumers are reflected in the leadership that they see on the shelf when they walk down the grocery store or the convenience store or the pharmacy. My background is in nonprofit leadership and recruiting, so I am very passionate about this discussion. Well, first of all, I think it's a fascinating time. The workforce and the social contract between workers and their employers has never been more in flux, so I think there's a lot of opportunity. but I'm somebody who has a background in diversity and inclusion. So I think there's huge opportunity here for both diverse people and also allies who want to be in companies who are more committed to that. And I think there's a huge opportunity within the Great Resignation, Great Retention for us to be focused on that. So today I'll be talking a lot about mentorship, programming, and creating community for people so that they want to show up to work and are excited to be there.
Finger snaps. I can't snap and hold a microphone at the same time, or this is going to result in a technology disaster for the microphone. Hi, I'm Sabrina Valpone. We share a lot of background, except I'm a little bit more in the academic and research side. So I come to you from CU Boulder, just up the way, and I also focus on diversity and inclusion. So really giving voice to marginalized individuals and groups and their lived experience in the workplace, really focusing on what are the barriers, which unfortunately there's quite a few, but especially depending on what group you're talking about or groups, and really looking at those barriers and what can we do to eliminate those or reduce the impact of those barriers, and also look at kind of a strength-based perspective. So what are the strengths instead of, how can we approach diversity and inclusion from how do we fix this? What are the, issues that come with communication? We've had that conversation for decades now, and of course we're still having it, but adding some new thoughts to that idea of how to make spaces more inclusive, and how to really capitalize on diversity. A lot of times I look at that through a strength-based perspective. What do we get in the workplace by diversifying and being more inclusive? And it turns out the answer is we get a lot. And so that's where I'm coming from with my research and with my answers today.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Hi, everyone. My name is Dwayne Griffith. I'm originally from the small island in the Caribbean known as St. Martin. So I like to say I work at the intersection between entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. And my background was actually, I worked for the government of St. Martin, where I sat on the National Development Plan Steering Committee, where I used the Sustainable Development Goals to create a development plan for the island. And for me, I recognized that working in government, things happen a lot slower. So I decided to transfer over to the entrepreneurship space, where I co-founded a company called Islandpreneur. So we help entrepreneurs on small islands launch and scale their businesses. And while working with entrepreneurs, I've worked with different accelerators and incubators here in the US as well. And while working in this space, I recognized that, as an entrepreneur, you can found a company, but you need intrapreneurs as well. The people who have the skills to come in and help you build that company. So I would say that I work in the intersection of both. The lens I'm bringing here is like, from Gen Z's perspective, what are they looking for in the workplace? As an employer, what are the things you can do to attract and retain young diverse talent? So that's me.
Amazing. What an incredible set of panelists. I'm super excited for this discussion. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is that we have such a diversity of perspectives here, really coming from the nonprofit space and the entrepreneur space. And also I love the lens of the academic space too, because I think, as we all know, when you're looking at attracting talent, that's one of the big gaps that we're seeing right now is students coming out of college. And how do you make that transition a little bit more effective? So, little run of show. We're going to start talking about recruitment and attraction. We're going to move into retention and engagement. And then we're going to finish with some actionable insights that hopefully all of y'all can use moving forward. We're going to end with a few moments for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please take a moment to write them down, and we will have some space for them at the end. Amazing. So starting off at the top, recruitment, a topic that probably is very near and dear to all of us. And, it's super simple, right? Finding the right people for the right role. Wow, that almost landed. I'm going to work on my jokes as a facilitator. But so in your mind, starting with recruitment, what are some of the things that you think make an employer attractive to the modern employee, and how do you see that changing in our current landscape?
Well, I'll go first since I have the recruitment background, but we all have valuable things to say on this. I heard on CPR that in Colorado alone, there's 2 open positions for every person looking. So it is definitely a buyer's market, right? This is different than it has been historically, although it's gone in and out. But we have a really critical moment where, I think this generation of workers, not just this upcoming generation of Gen Z, but this generation of workers is looking for something different. They're coming out of a really difficult and challenging 2 years. And I was talking to a recruiter this morning, and he said a candidate just clicked off their Zoom in the middle of an interview because they weren't interested in what was being said by the interviewer. So, okay, this is ridiculous, and it's inappropriate, it's unprofessional, but it's also a reality that if you're an employer, you're working around. So it's really comes down to, we actually had this conversation, there's a huge kind of bullshit meter. And people, I think that's always been the case with job seekers. They've always been able to kind of sniff out when something's kind of off or something isn't. But the difference is that there's a lot of options today, and so they're gonna walk away. So as much as you can, think about the experience of the people who are applying and think about how you can have the most authentic conversation with them and reduce any unnecessary steps and barriers. It seems so simple, but I can guarantee you if you did an audit on your experience and you went and you apply to a job on your site right now, that there are steps that you can eliminate and ways that you can have a more authentic experience. There's not a silver bullet. There's not some easy way to find the best talent. It's gonna take a lot of work, but I think at the end of the day, it's really about how you can have a really authentic connection and transparency about your values and how those are gonna be experienced if that person were to come on and join your team.
And I want to table that because I think the values topic is super important, especially in the modern day of people really aligning with the values of a company and that being like a pivotal thing in them coming on board. So we'll come back to that.
Sure, definitely. And I'll take it from the different perspective of what I see a lot of young people looking for. So first and foremost, I gotta say, by 2030, about 30% of the workforce is gonna be Gen Z people. And a recent study shown that 29% of them don't know where to begin. So when we talk about attracting talent, one of the first points of contact might be that job application, whether it is on the website or that recruitment side. And let's talk about labels. So from 2017 to 2021, there was a study done where 4 million job posts were looked at, and about 35% of them said that an entry-level person required minimum 3 years of experience. What? And I get it, 0 to 5 years, as people say, is entry level. But as someone recently graduating from college, as a job poster, think about how you label that, because we start to search for labels, entry level, all of this. And when it's on the wrong label, it doesn't already affects my experience when I'm trying to, find these opportunities. The next thing is values. There's always this window dressing of values sometimes, and I wanted to just touch on that a bit. You would say, oh, we support diversity, equity, and inclusion on your website, and then during Pride Month, you have the logo, and then on July 1st, it's gone. It's it's in your branding, it's there, but you actually don't really follow the values. And if I can't find any trail of you implementing your values in your day-to-day functions or showing up on other forms of whether it's a website or even your social media or in your employee engagement, if I don't see any of that, then I recognize you're being inauthentic and you're just window dressing with values. Another thing is flexibility. As we know, pandemic happened, so work from home is a thing, and a lot of companies are shying away from that. And as young people, we like to see that there's an option for flexibility in when we're looking for position. And the final thing I'd like to mention is when you do your job descriptions, a lot of people don't post salary ranges and stuff like that. So help me set the expectations from the beginning. Are there any salary ranges that you can post? There are a lot of international students who are looking for opportunities. So is it friendly, are you looking for H-1B sponsorship? And then you click yes, and then you're out the door. But there's a lot of international students who did STEM degrees who can work 3 years without sponsorship for your company. So figuring out ways how you can include these different individuals and have it in the job posting when you're recruiting, because that's my first point of contact when I interact with a company, is really important.
and bringing some of those points together in actually some really practical ways. Some things I've seen from research within the last year is that organizations that espouse their values in a way that they're engaging in those social justice type communications, and there's varying degrees to that. Do you put out statements that just acknowledge that employees are going through a hard time, or espouse what our values are as a company in relation to social justice conversations, whatever those may be? There's a number of them. And that actually making statements and engaging with your values in a public way has better outcomes. And we can talk about a host of what those outcomes are. But for engagement and what that actual environment in the organization looks like in terms of it being a better place to work and employees rating it as such, making a statement, organizations sometimes are really scared to do that, to engage in with their values in that way. But compared to not making a statement, I've done the research in the last year. We're not in a place anymore where we can just have a statement or values on a website and then not engage with it at another level, especially when these crisis moments come up. So there is research behind that, and it's some that I've done and my colleagues have done as well. So removing that barrier to have a first impression that the values, this is some place that I want to work, or a place that values and cares about employees and their experiences, is undeniable in terms of the outcomes. And another practical way to really think about that, I did some consulting work a few years ago in Saudi Arabia, and learned a really valuable lesson about, and of course, because maybe different cultural norms and things like that, they went about recruiting in a slightly different way than what is the norm here. But I learned a really valuable lesson that I'll take with me and I think is valuable here. When we have a number of employees, especially maybe from marginalized backgrounds or just in general, the workforce really, do I want to be here, or am I involved in the Great Resignation? Building those relationships before we do. In Saudi Arabia, I saw a lot of organizations actually go about things in a different way, where they were recruiting from the high school level on. Is that going to happen in the U.S.? Probably not. But when you come in and give a pitch, maybe during an internship or during, one page of a recruitment ad, you have to build those relationships earlier. If these communities that have been hit really hard, which all of us have, but we can talk about, specific communities maybe being hit harder by some of these pandemic and other social justice conversations recently. But if you're really going to build trust that this is a place that they want to work, recruitment has to look a little different. Does it have to look like you're reaching out to them in high school? No. But those earlier relationships and really building that trust is something we need to be considering, because that doesn't happen in a one-page recruitment ad. The traditional way of doing it, now that we're reconceptualizing work, we can change that. Is that
Yes,
fair to
I
say?
love that you brought that up. And I love the idea of starting young. And I think one really practical, very concrete piece of advice I can provide as a former recruiter is to foster a culture of informational interviews. If you or your managers are in the habit of turning down somebody who reaches out and wants to talk to you about your company, you're already behind. I'm talking anybody who wants to talk about your company, who reaches out on a DM, Instagram, LinkedIn. If you're, at a coffee shop and someone says, that sounds really interesting. That could also be a KPI for some of your leaders. This is something that builds a pipeline, so when you're in a talent crunch, you're not starting from zero. It also starts to help people understand when they meet somebody, they become less prejudiced about the 3 years experience doing blah-de-blah-de-blah. They say, oh, that dude could definitely do that job, and he has nothing that I would have written as a requirement in my job description. So this is something that should be inbound and it should be outbound. It should be something you're actively trying to create. And it's as easy as, just offering that up on your website, a real person's email. Not just having job positions that are open, but say like, we wanna, not just, we'd love to see your application if you're interested in our company, but like book a time on my calendar right now. And I'll have it's 30 minutes, y'all. You will learn so much. If they aren't a person who you wanna hire, they will know somebody. This idea that this financial planner will say like, live like no one else so you can live like no one else. With the idea that like, you know, like skip the latte so you can buy $1 million mansion. I don't really know how that applies to that. But the idea is here, like live like nobody else. Do things that other companies aren't willing to do so that you stand out. That's the only, there's no silver bullet. It's a lot of putting in the work, but the work could be as easy as taking 3 30-minute phone calls a week and making that a part of your job description and your commitment. And I'm talking about CEOs, I'm talking about CFOs, I'm talking about people in leadership who can start to build relationships and make yourself really stand out in a market that's very saturated.
Yeah, love that. And I just wanted to build on the expectation piece in the posting, like something as simple as listing out what are the parts of the recruitment. And I started to see a lot of companies do that a lot more recently. Be like, hey, there's a phone screening, then there's a take-home assignment, there's all of this. And don't wait until I come into the first interview to do that, because I had a friend who went through a 1.5-month long interview process just a while ago. And then at the final interview process, when she went into the office, they told her, sorry, we're gonna do a hiring pause right now. Wasted her entire time going through all these different phases and not knowing it in advance. And something as simple to say, she was on a timeline because she was an international student as well, and she was like, hey, by this date, I have to get employed. So she wasted a 1.5 months of her time going through with this company instead of them having it listed out front to know that, hey, this is how long our processes take, so that whether you're interested or not, you'll know whether to continue.
Can I just say one more thing?
Please.
If you're having people do more than 1 hour of work for an interview, you should be compensating them. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it creates a huge barrier for people who are trying to make a living, and it creates a diversity and inclusion problem. So if you, really truly have somebody go through an audit of your interview experience, how much time is someone spending? I'm not talking about prep for an interview. I'm talking about if you send them home and ask them to do a case study or a presentation. That's intellectual property. You need to be paying somebody and show that you respect their time and energy. It doesn't have to be expensive. It could be $25 an hour, y'all. It's about showing that you respect their time. And again, that's gonna make you stand out. That shows your lived values of valuing your talent and their time and their knowledge and their expertise. So I think that's a critical thing. And empowering your hiring managers, if they know that they have the right person in front of them, to skip the rest of the interviews and the formalities as much as possible. I'm not talking about day one, make them an offer on the spot. But I've worked with amazing hiring managers who said, this is my guy. I don't need to see 100 people. Can we make an offer today? And you know what? That goes such a long way. Don't get so caught up in your processes that you're losing sight of what you're trying to do, which is find great talent. Once you find great talent, how quickly can you get them on board and show them that you're committed to, them having a good experience as well? Sorry, I'm just trying to think of as many practical.
Don't be sorry, yeah.
I feel like these panels can get so lofty, and we're like, you guys should be doing really important stuff. You already know that. If you're here, you're already really committed to this. What can we do that's really concrete? So.
Absolutely. Love that. And what I'm hearing a lot of is really embodying values that are backed by this idea of action, and not just saying things and not just putting it down on paper, but really living into it on a day-to-day basis. And a theme that's coming up for me around this action is coming back to this human to human aspect, right? I think especially with everything going so digital, these massive online job boards and applicant tracking systems, it's really easy to get lost in this person is just a piece of paper with a bunch of data on it. And coming back to the fact that it's really about that human to human connection, and when you do see that and you do feel that, really acting on it. So I think that's super, super incredible and an awesome point. And I'd love to build on that just a little bit, and looking specifically from you, Sabrina, from the university lens, what are you seeing right now in the student body and this younger generation coming into their workforce? Are there themes around how they're interacting with getting hired by companies?
Yeah, sometimes it has to do with expectations. And you don't know what you don't know. And I'm talking about at the undergraduate level, the master's and MBA level, and the PhD level. So I'm seeing this in different ways at every single level coming out of the university. If there was 2.5 years where in-person events, networking, conferences, whatever that looks like at the different levels, were not in person, there is a skill set that universities have built into developing soft skills, developing networks, things like that a lot of students didn't get that full experience. We did our darndest to make up for that in a number of ways, but there's only so much you can do on Zoom. So if I really want to capture an answer to that question is there's a little bit of fear that they know they're missing out on an experience or something that they wanted to get from college, and it's not their fault that they didn't get that. And they have all the breadcrumbs, they have all the, it's just not quite put together yet because they didn't have that conference or that networking event to kind of pull that skill set together. And so hopefully, they didn't graduate last year. No, hopefully they they're having time now to kind of solidify that skill set that comes with some of the outside the classroom things, but also inside the classroom, the soft skill set development that, it's really hard to go into an interview with confidence knowing that, I should be better at this, or I wasn't able to get to the career office to do this, or they didn't have as many events to prep me in this because of COVID or something like that. And we're getting out of that now, but acknowledging that if you don't feel that you have that confidence and it's not your fault, that could impact that first impression you're bringing. But employers knowing that, at the university side, we did a lot and it looked a little different. And sometimes we had ups and downs of the effectiveness of different things we were trying on Zoom to develop those skill sets. They have the raw, it just needs to come together sometimes. So if organizations and at the first couple of stages can be a little bit flexible, which I'm sure you're already doing, but just think about that. It's like, you're maybe weak or didn't have an experience in something that you paid for and that it was signed up for and you would have, that can be kind of a knock on the ego or the confidence that we know is so important going into first interviews and during the recruitment process. So just a little flexibility and grace and, with that, which sometimes it's really hard to do that when we're coming out of a pandemic on the organization side as well. But really, again, the human-to-human aspect and realizing kind of the mindset that some of these folks that you're seeing are in and being just kind of humble and, graceful about that, I think goes a long way because some of them are a little scared, they want confidence in areas that they know they need to bring to an interview and they don't necessarily have a lot of experience due to limited opportunities.
Yeah, most definitely. And just to build on that a little bit, just like looking at the career centers at universities, they're great, but sometimes there's 1,000 students to one career counselor, which is you don't have a lot of time to work with them. So as employers in that first stage of the interview, making sure you create a brave space where you're like, hey, I want this to be a conversation. Right? I want you to show up as your authentic self. This is not like a strict interview where you have to get the answers perfectly. I just want to get to know you. And doing that and setting the tone in the beginning of the interview goes a long way for the applicant to feel comfortable and really show up as who they really are. Because sometimes we have these expectations of what a proper interview should look like. And I have to give these proper answers, and then you rehearse and you prepare, and then you go in, and then everything goes out your mind, and you're like, I don't know what I'm saying right now. I'm just on a rant and I'm rambling. But having that grace and say, you know what, this is just a conversation. I want to get to know you. Will really help the applicant go through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Kathleen, I don't know if you have anything to add in terms of actionable insights, but I'm curious from the recruiting lens, how can companies find that balance of meeting young, excited, passionate talent where they're at, but also still holding them to a standard and asking them the right questions to make sure they are like qualified to that.
So you're asking specifically during an interview process?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to past performance indicates future performance. And so I think you can focus less on, have you ever used Salesforce and specifically done a customization for this, this, and this? Like, tell me about a time that you did you were asked to do something and you didn't know how to do it. Like, think more broadly about how somebody can give you an example that shows you that they have the right stuff. You gotta think way more broadly. And you're really looking for potential. You're not looking for somebody who's done that job before. That person will be bored. So like, let me say that again. If someone has done what you're looking for in the job that you're hiring, you aren't gonna have them for very long. And I don't know if you guys have run your rehiring numbers, but it is expensive. So take your time and really look for potential and hire managers that know how to manage for potential. I think this is not just about Gen Z and the next generation. This is about everybody. You're not looking for a lateral move. You're looking for someone who has been in the top 20% of their job. That means they're a high performer, they're a high achiever, they have a track record of being able to perform, reach, teach themselves things. You're asking questions to kind of give yourself an understanding of what that looks like and how it applies to the role that you're looking at. And I also have, an idea about how to segue into retention, but I don't know if you're ready to talk about that yet.
Yeah, no, I think we're going in towards the onboarding process. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that 83% of people believe that it's their employer's responsibility to provide development and learning. So even, Gen Z, yes, they have had a lot of challenges in their come up, right? And you might need to be sensitive to that. But I think any employee can benefit from mentorship because we don't really learn what we're doing in our job in school or even in the last job that we had. There's so much on-site learning. And I think mentorship is incredible. It is something that is very affordable for small companies to implement. It is helpful in retention. It's helpful to find the next people you're trying to promote from within. People who are mentored are less likely to be looking for other jobs. They're more likely to feel fulfilled and energized and excited and more connected. And in this virtual workplace, forget about the Zoom happy hours, okay? Because I think I'm fully tired. I will not drink another drink on Zoom, so don't invite me. But having real connection and a guided reason and a real KPI and a real reason about what you're trying to do. There's peer-to-peer mentorship, there's group mentorship, there's reverse mentorship, where Gen Z teaches the older generation how to do digital social media. That's one example. But there are a lot of ways to create connection. And again, to say we value you, we value your potential, we want to invest in you, we want you to teach us. At Project Potluck, our mentors say, we got more out of this, meeting these incredible entrepreneurs, these incredible professionals. We got more out of this than they got out of my 45 years of industry experience. That's powerful all around for everybody involved. And it could be something that you do in-house, or it could be a manager saying, I know someone who I think would really be able to invest in you and I would love to connect you, and you can spend a couple hours, a month or a quarter having these conversations. It doesn't have to be so formal. It doesn't have to be a program that's rolled out. Think about ways that you can invest in the people no matter what stage they're at. I think that's huge for retention. It's also what they're going to be asking about in recruiting as well.
I am curious, just show of hands, how many of y'all have have had a mentorship program set up in your organization?
Oh my God, yes.
Nice. Yes. How many would say it works really well, is working really well? Incredible. I'm curious, do you have any insights off the top of your head around what brings together a really strong mentorship program? Yeah.
One of the main things I would say, I came from the telecom industry, and I work for a company called TriNet, which we're a human resources company. We offer a platform that manages all solutions from cable management, benefits, and one of the biggest things is coming from the telecom industry. I had no idea what I was doing in this new role. Speaking to one of the main things that you mentioned was an efficient mean, it's been a great process, learning process, being able to really connect with her, seeing how things are done in a sector where I knew absolutely nothing about. So I would say it's being, having that mentor, having that backbone that really keeps you within the company when you're frustrated. They help you get through it. It's, I mean, it's really something that I would say is very undervalued at many companies.
Yeah,
Also, you just gave
absolutely.
me a great idea. Hot take: get your newly hired Gen Zers to reverse mentor on how to improve the recruitment process. That's another great way to utilize them, especially if they've
Yeah.
recently been hired. Hot take.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Like, I was just going to that. Like, there's this workplace confidence survey that said 40% of Gen Z would be willing to take a 5% pay cut for a company that has learning and development opportunities and career growth opportunities. So like that reverse mentorship, all of that is like, really important. And the onboarding phase, like, people are like, oh, the first 3 months is onboarded. The onboarding is the first year. The first year, like studies have shown, if you onboard someone and you take that time within that first year to make sure that they're well placed in the company, they're more likely to stay with that company. Onboarding causes about 82% of retention, about up in 70% of productivity, but like 10% of applicants find that the onboarding process is actually good. So what are the things you can do? I know I have a lot of friends in the tech company and I've worked in that space a bit. And other than the swag and all the cool perks that like actually comes with that, what are the things you can do in the beginning phases? Who's your hiring buddy? Right? Who's that person you connect that person with when they have questions about the process that they can go to? Do you do a session on culture and values and how it's implemented? I went through an interview process a while back and one of their values was obligation to disagree. And I was like, obligation to disagree? What is that? And it's like, hey, we're not encouraging you to disagree. If you don't like something, you have an obligation to disagree with us and share it. And if we don't make those changes, then you have to disagree and commit, and we'll try to work with you for sure. But seeing that other employees in the company do that already, even in that process, will actually help you out.
Absolutely. And I heard over the course of the first year, there's like a consistency element to it, right? And one thing that when we were talking about what we were going to say here today was you were talking about the idea of reimagining what like employer check-ins look like. So I'm curious if there are things that you've seen work really well in that kind of year plus of onboarding in terms of a cadence around check-ins and how those run.
Yeah, most definitely. I think in the early phases, it's getting to know your teammates, because sometimes you join these companies and you have connections with your direct manager, but you don't really know who you're working with over a period of time. So what I see some companies do within the first couple of months, they have these scheduled check-ins with different teams. So you understand how these different teams work with your department and you know who's in the company and what are the different functions. The next thing is just ensuring that there's more direct time with your direct manager. Sometimes some of these roles, it's very independent. You can always do your own thing, and then every once a month or whenever you check in with your direct manager to work with them. But having more opportunities where the manager can say, you know what, if you have any question, I am available, instead of being like, oh, we have the scheduled check-in at the end of the month, so come with your questions there, as opposed to being available when they need to.
And a way to fill in a lot of those gaps and get people invested in the culture and connected across those boundaries and silos, as you were hinting at in your answer, is ERGs and affinity groups that can have a huge retention effect. The research is coming out now. But just think about, is that really necessarily one of the first things you tell people, like in an onboarding process or the socialization process? Maybe. But a lot of times those things about culture where you might find like a really good connection and real engagement, oftentimes it's like word of mouth, or if your mentor tells you, or 2 months at your second meetup or check in with your direct supervisor, they mention something. That's a big gap where you could really get a high level of engagement and really networking across those direct, direct supervisors, direct people in your department or division. So I think that's a huge retention tool across a number of groups, especially we see marginalized or minority groups really for the most part, the research shows getting a lot out of that if they're managed correctly. That's another conversation.
And they don't have to be in your organization. Like if you guys are in, I mean, how many of you are in tech? Oh, okay, actually. Okay, so not even, I thought it would be like everybody, but okay, so, I mean, but in tech, like you can, there's Dev Color. It's a place for engineers who are people of color. It's something that you can pay I think it's $600 for them to be a part of a mentorship group, where they're connected. I mean, that is going to be a huge value for your company. Don't be so worried about, they might get poached while they're there. They're going to receive learning and investment that you don't have to facilitate. So start to get creative. If you're in a different industry, be on the lookout for professional associations that you can, kind of piggyback off of. It doesn't have to just be something that you do in-house, and it can be individual. One person in front of you can see that, you can say, this person really needs something different than everybody else in their role. I want to help them find that. That's going to be a way to be able to be nimble and lean and flexible if you don't necessarily have a huge budget to implement these types of programs. They're still super effective. It's about community.
Absolutely. And again, a lot of the themes that I'm hearing are relationships and people, right? And actually asking somebody, what do you feel like you're not comfortable in? What are some of the programs that you could engage with that would make you feel more confident in those workplace, and actually having those conversations and bringing a level of vulnerability to it, right? Of we don't have everything all figured out all the time. And I think especially coming from the younger generation, there's this air of I have to fake it till I make it, and I have to make sure that I show up in all the right ways. And what we're actually seeing through a lot of the work that we do is that if you invest and take interest in their development as people, they're going to be much, much more engaged with you as an employer, because it's a give and take, and it completes the circuit a little bit. So I'm curious, in terms of going into even the external ideas of learning and development, right? Do you have any thoughts on best practices of how companies can support employees in finding training, development, learning opportunities that will get them where they need to go?
Well, I mean, I was gonna save this for the end where we're like, what can you do? But the most important thing I can say is hire amazing managers who are empathetic individuals, who aren't obsessed with policy, who can see people in front of them. My dad, I'm one of 4 kids. My parents are gardeners. And they would say, we have 4 different plants. Some need a lot of water. Some need, more shade than others. Some need to be fertilized. You cannot treat your garden the same way. So you have to hire people who can do that. A really great question to ask if you're interviewing a hiring manager is, how many people on your team have been promoted outside of the company and within? What is I had a manager, his proudest moment that he brought up in every interview were the people who had left and were now running their own shops under him. That's the kind of person that you want, because they're going to figure out what every individual needs and gets them. They're not going to be obsessed with we have this program or this policy. Do things as individually as you can, and provide, customized support. And also if you have something that an employee needs and you can't provide it, give them some time at work to research and come back to you with a proposal. Give them a budget and ask them to manage that for their own professional development. That should be, again, these are nominal costs compared to rehiring. The cost of retention investing in retention is one of the best places you can take your dollar far, because rehiring is incredibly expensive.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about the professional development fund, but you talked on it.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's as a company, if you don't know what to do, because again, some companies are smaller and they can't invest and create an entire program as yet, because you're still in the early phases. So if you're in that phase, hey, we have X amount for professional development. If you can't cover it all, we can support you here, and we can support you in these different things that you want to pursue. And it's a small gesture when you're in the smaller phases, and it's good for the employee.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have just one quick sentence.
Go for it, please.
This is something that I got a lot out of in my graduate school experience, but if you are in a situation where maybe you're a smaller company or look to your universities. A lot of times professors, especially individuals getting PhDs, they have the most current knowledge. And is it from sometimes a theoretical instead of a practical background? Yes, and you're all probably ready to like walk out right now. But if you are creating, okay, was that too harsh? A little bit. No, but like if you are creating an infrastructure of something, a mentoring program, or what should this look like? That's what you need at that moment. And if creating an infrastructure, and if these are on your culture or climate surveys, the feedback you're getting that there's gaps in the culture and the environment and you're looking to develop programs like a mentoring program or something like that, universities, especially professors who work with PhD students and things like that, are I don't want to say cheap because it might depend on who you talk to, but are a really nice resource that want to help. And I know, like, the way I got to go to conferences and networking events when I was in graduate school was because a company paid for that. And that, $500, that's very different than what you would be paying a consultant. And a lot of times they have the same exact degree. So just something to think about if you are in that position. It's a really good resource. And I know I did that all throughout graduate school and put some really cool programs together to get a lot of women in the oil and gas industry in top 500 Fortune 500 organizations. So developing those programs is something that, I hope is a lasting impact in an industry. And yeah.
Absolutely. Amazing. So before we open it up to some questions, if you don't have a question yet, take some moments to think about one, because we'd love to hear what y'all have to say. But one last little piece that I'd just love to touch on, and I think y'all are all such experts in it in your own different way, but kind of coming back to the beginning when we were talking about recruitment, I think we all are on the same page of we want our companies and our workplaces to really help build a safer, more equitable, more just, more inclusive future. And one of the things that companies do is sometimes they just talk about it, right? And they don't actually embody it. So I'm curious to hear from all of you, how can companies really bring this angle of diversity and inclusiveness not just into their marketing and their branding, but actually into this process of engaging and developing employees?
Yeah. So I do a lot of research on diversity climate specifically, and it's amazing in climate for inclusion, which overlap but are slightly different. It's really this broad approach that's actually about bringing the lived experience into the organization. And there's such a disconnect when you have your marketing team or your branding, brands and this and that, and HR processes actually reflecting the lived experience. So I really liked your idea of auditing, for example, the recruitment process. What if we do that for culture and climate and things like that? And a lot of times, organization solution is, let's go talk to the person that looks like this to get this experience. And they're not going to tell you the truth if that's the environment you have, that is how you're bringing in the lived experience. So finding ways to audit, so to speak, your culture and your climate in a way that is not threatening to the employment or the psychological safety of marginalized employees is really important. Not putting them on the spot about what is your experience, things like that. And I'll give you a really good example from some of my research. In management research, there in the last decade, there has been kind of a spark in understanding pregnant women and the stigma and discrimination that they kind of face throughout, announcing and disclosing that they're pregnant, to after maternity leave, kind of where is my job, all the emotions, all of the experiences, everything, all the barriers that really exist there, pre and post maternity. However, 9 years ago when I had my daughter, I realized there's a natural extension of this, looking at how many people, for example, breastfeed after returning back from maternity leave, and there is so much stigma. And when we did these interviews, a lot of the coworkers were talking about, oh, it's like people who get cigarette breaks. It's like, oh, like they're just taking breaks throughout their day, and just so much stigma around what is going on, and just not understanding the lived experience of some of these employees and what they're bringing to the workplace. And now, especially post-pandemic, when life and work boundaries are just more and more integrated in ways that we never really thought of would be in our professional arena before, we have to start rethinking what is the lived experience, and is that truly embodied in the culture? And sometimes just reading, articles about, things that are in the conversation around pregnant women or things like that doesn't always fully extend to what our lived experience is as employees. For example, yes, that did happen when I was pregnant, but now I'm back and I'm still having barriers. I'm still facing this stigma. I'm not wanting to walk by, the C-suite on my way to the lactation room, things like that. So a lot of times it's just digging deeper, getting really at it in a way that maintains the psychological safety of the people that you're asking.
Yeah, and I'll take it from like the lens. Oh,
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Of like when creating these values and principles of the company, sometimes it's just a team of people from leadership sitting together and creating these values, and they say, hey, managers, go implement this. When creating values and principles and stuff like that, meeting with the different departments and figuring out how to integrate these values in their day-to-day settings is something that many companies overlook. And I would encourage a lot of people to be like, hey, yeah, we create these values. Now, can we implement it by living it? Can we walk the walk? Can we figure out what are processes and systems that we need to put into place so that these values are reflected and it helps the people that they're intended to serve?
I love that. And I'll actually take it one step further. This is a very difficult question. There's so many things that need to be done. But there's one thing, I think, a really good concrete place to start, and that's figuring out the value of diversity in your company. Not a value like respect, diversity. I'm talking about what is the value, the bottom line, a dollar, something maybe intangible, but something very concrete that having a diverse talent brings to your company. We know from research that diversity leads to innovation. It leads to capturing more markets. It leads to more sales. Diversity is it's the right thing to do. It's altruistic. In this environment, it feels non-negotiable because of the past couple of years and how much has come to light and how, cancel culture. That's not the reason. First of all, diversity has been a need for much longer than 2020, but we'll take it from there to get started. But the thing is it's not really about we should do this. We really need to do this. This is the right thing to do. Gen Z is going to ask us. This is about your bottom line, and this is about you surviving and innovating in your industry. That's not going to be possible if you do not have a diverse talent. So that you need to figure that out. You need to figure out the reason for diversity in your company, and have that be a constant conversation so that when opportunities come up to support diverse people, to hire diverse people, it's the right thing to do. That's huge.
One sentence to follow up. Let's think about that in a practical way. Would you ever have an initiative ever at your organization that you haven't defined in a strategic way? I have a research project that you would be shocked at the amount of organizations that do not define diversity. So they think about it in this broad way, we should be checking a box. We all know how many different types of diversities there are. Not all of them are necessarily programs and practices and policies that your organization is an expert in, or that you really are even able to really, mentor and develop. So thinking about diversity in a very broad way, it's yes, we're open to all types of diversity. The organizations that do it really well and actually match their diversity management policies, procedures, getting that into their organization in a way that truly makes a difference to affect those bottom line outcomes, are more strategic about actually defining what diversity means to their organization, the specific types of diversity where they need to see improvements when it comes to recruitment, what's on your dashboard, things like that. Breaking it down in a way that is not, in this broad way, diversity. That's not going to get you to the bottom line outcomes. Breaking it down, and that's also what we're talking about when we're lived experience into, it's not just women are turning over. It's like, no, women who come back from maternity leave and don't feel comfortable at this stage, post-maternity, they're the ones leaving. Breaking it down in a way that diversity isn't just this, and inclusion, and justice, and equity. It's really define what diversity means to your organization. You'd be surprised at how many millions and millions of dollars are being invested into organizations on diversity initiatives when you haven't even defined what you're actually trying to accomplish for a specific group or groups. That makes no sense. You would never do that in an organization with any other initiative. Start with a definition. That's not a hard ask. That common sense, right? Okay. I'm off my soapbox. Sorry.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that specificity around really bringing a definition to it and really being intentional and connecting to the reason why you want this and need this to happen, and not just doing it for the accolade or the outside or whatever it may be. So in our last few minutes, I'd love to open it up. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to pose to our amazing panel? Down over here. And these mics don't do anything, so if you could just stand up and go for it.
This is more in regards to the interview and offer stages for retaining or even attracting talent. I've seen time and time again candidates have 3 or 4 offers or things that are competing nationwide remote. Do you think that reverse reference checks would be beneficial as a differentiator within your organization? This is my boss, these are my peers, this is who reports to me. All this, get the full picture of who I am, what I'd like to work for, etc. Do you think that would be a value add?
Yes.
Just to repeat the question if everybody heard it, looking at the idea of reverse reference checks, especially when employees may have multiple offers on the table.
Yes. Also, hot take, reference checks are kind of the research shows they're maybe not a great use of time. I would definitely say that's probably one of the best things that you can offer, and make sure that the people who are expecting those calls know about that candidate, and don't ask them, tell me a little bit about yourself. They've just been through 7 interviews where they've had to say the same spiel. Give them the respect of briefing those people. And I think that's an amazing offer. And also, do your research on reference checks and make sure they're really effective when you're checking an employee, because that can also be a huge holdup at an end stage if they have multiple offers.
Time consuming.
Yes. I merge those two together, so I think that's a great idea, and also great.
But again, I really think that opens up the door to have some of those more stronger relationships with multiple people in the company, right off the bat too. So I love that concept.
I think you can also offer that early on. It doesn't have to be at the end of stage, so they can start having those conversations during the interview process as well.
There's a question here.
Yeah, go for it in the back.
Recruiting perspective and consulting is what I do with small businesses. Tips and tricks for how to talk to employers in a way that they understand the need to adjust their hiring, their interview process. So I'm often running into situations where they're maybe a little bit more committed to their old way of doing it and not understanding what the environment looks like.
Tips and tricks for encouraging employers to re-look at their recruiting processes if maybe they're stuck in their old ways.
From that front, I think the first thing you need to know is hey, why are you continuing with that process? Are you trying to attract new talent, or are you trying to attract the same type of people? So I think the first thing to do is help them. What are the challenges you have in the recruitment cycle and then show them the cleaner glass of water. Be like, hey, Gen Z, these types of employees, these are the things that they are looking for. And oftentimes your process hinders that. So try to do a compare and comparison to say, hey, this generation, this is what they're looking for. Your process caters to, I don't know, Gen X, or not necessarily, but like, your process caters to a certain group of people, and these are the challenges that you have in the process. So try to show them the cleaner glass of water, I would say, and research of the newer generation.
Just in the interest of time, one more? Yeah, go for it. Oh, yeah, we have a couple.
I love this question.
Yeah, how can companies really work with applicant tracking systems and actually make them more effective? Because stuff does get lost. That's totally true.
I mean, I love the idea of selecting, like maybe doing a hybrid model where you're using, AI to help with some of the workload, but then challenging hiring managers to pick 2 or 3 people to at least have informational interviews who are not in there, or to pass resumes on to people in other departments who might be a good fit. So when I was recruiting, I always had a pool outside of my applicant tracking system for just like hot prospects that I wanted to stay in touch with. LinkedIn, you could use the recruiter seat, the light for something like that. And really be able to encourage people that that's part of the interview process, is that they're looking beyond the pool that's just pushed to them through their ATS system. Good question. I hate tracking systems.
Amazing. So we are at the top of our hour. I just wanted to be respectful to Denver Startup Week because they asked us to close on time. We are very much going to stick around and would love to continue this conversation, because I think it's got, we're just scratching the surface in all of this, right? And how can we continue to build relationships and really help and support each other in actually implementing all of these things. So thank you all for showing up. Can we give a quick hand to our amazing panelists? Awesome, y'all. Thanks for showing up. We'll be around to chat after if you want to, but enjoy the rest of your time in Colorado. Appreciate y'all.